is said to be the reason why the Congress amended the National Defense Authorization Act, requiring the review of reported UFO sightings. Originally, they were supposed to go back to 1947. Jacques Vallée made them change it to 1945. That law was signed on December of 2022. It has a lot to do, I believe, with this case we're going to talk about today. I'm calling it a case. I'm sorry, book that we're going to talk about today. But I think that it's also a tribute to how influential Jacques Vallée still is with our government. And he's a long timer. We spoke a lot about Jacques Vallée when we talked about the Holloman landing in 1964. He was up to his ears in it. He was up to his ears in Socorro. He was, he's always in New Mexico, or he spent a lot of time in New Mexico with Dr. Hynek. So he's very familiar with the area, and I respect his opinion and his descriptions of New Mexico and what he talks about in our area. So it carries a lot of weight. So this book is about a traumatic event that happened to two children, Reme Baca, who was 7, and Jose Padilla, who was 9. Now, this happened in 1945. So we're going to discuss the book, and I brought 2 copies, my original version 2 and version 3 that Denise Dawn gave to me. I read this book, and I read this one because I wanted to see what was the 2 differences. And there is. We'll talk about those. But it's a hefty book, guys. There's a lot of stuff in here. It's an awful lot of stuff in here. So we're going to get started with it now. And it's called Trinity, the Best Kept Secret. It's about San Antonio, New Mexico. And some of you may know the Baca and Padilla families because they're local. This book is about Reme and Jose's very detailed memories of the summer of 1945. And I feel strongly that a child's a believable witness. A child is a very believable witness if you get to them before other influences get to them and people put other ideas in their heads. So their imagination, can run wild with them, but they're good witnesses. Originally, the book was released in June of 2021, 2nd edition, August of 2022, and 3rd edition, April 2024. This is popular, and that's a lot of books to sell. Think about that. They're $24.99 each. That's a lot of books they sold. When the Oppenheimer movie came out, the interest in Trinity just shot up, and people bought that book like crazy because that's how they marketed it as the they marketed it. The original, I don't have a copy of the original one, but the original one didn't have Trinity on the front of it. It had a picture of their parents. It had a picture of farms, and it was white. Had nothing to do. But then when that Oppenheimer movie came out, boy, they changed the graphics, they changed everything, and these things were flying off the shelf. So, and we spoke about this book. I'm going to tell you, we spoke about this thing constantly up at Mad Coffee. We all had an opinion on it. We all read it. We all had different opinions. So the event in this book happened very close to Trinity, to Ground Zero, the atomic bomb blast zone, which was just 17 miles east of the Padilla family ranch. Now, I'm sure a lot of things happened to us as children that we remember to this day, but can you imagine an atomic bomb going off 17 miles from your house and not knowing what it was? Because back then in 1945, World War II was still going on. And that summer, the government didn't admit that that was the Manhattan Project. Nobody knew what it was when it went off here in the Tularosa Basin. Now, it wasn't until after Hiroshima on August 5th, 1945, that the government said that blast, and they were calling it Alamogordo. The Alamogordo blast was the testing of the atomic bomb, which eventually was used in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So that the explosion rocked the basin on July 16th. So, and they said it was a ammunition shack exploded on the Alamogordo Gunnery Range. The Alamogordo Gunnery Range is White Sands Proving Ground. It became White Sands Proving Grounds. Now it's White Sands Missile Range. So, that's how close we are to that area, but they were right on top of it as children. So I'm going to attempt to show a YouTube clip. You guys know how this ends up sometime. And it was made by Jose Padilla last year. He was 87, and he was talking to a reporter in California about the event that he and Reme witnessed as a child. Zoomers, you guys may or may not hear this. We're going to give it a whirl, though, but hopefully everybody here.
And heard another boom.
I told my friend, it must be another test from the bomb. And he says, no, it's not a bomb. Look at the smoke coming out of the ground.
It appeared to be coming from an avocado-shaped aircraft. This is an artist's rendering.
All of a sudden, 3 little, I would say, kids got up of it. They were kind of sashaying and running around in circles.
He says they resembled extraterrestrials he's since seen in the movies.
They walk like us, but they look like a fire ant standing up.
Jose and I recently met up at a favorite spot of his, the Griffith Park Observatory.
Did you have any fear of these creatures?
No, sir. They had crashed at my father's ranch, and they needed help.
Over the following 10 days, Jose says the military cleaned up the wreckage, while he and his friend watched from a nearby ridge.
I still hear them pretty good.
His buddy, Reme Baca, became a Marine, moved to Washington State, and worked in politics. Jose moved to Roland Heights and quietly raised a family.
We had lost each other.
The men were interviewed by investigative reporter and UFO researcher Paula Harris in 2012. Harris was investigating a claim by the son of World War II Army pilot William Brophy.
The pilot's son told me the last missions of his father was to fly over that area, and he said that when he flew over that he saw 2 little Indian boys on horseback.
Harris believes those 2 boys were Jose and his friend. Though warned to stay away, they returned to their viewing ridge day after day.
We were hiding behind cactuses.
Jose says when soldiers took a break from cleanup, he and his friends entered the craft. The creatures were gone, but something else caught his eye.
There was like a little dial.
Jose yanked it out.
I took the part and hid it in my garage.
Chemical testing in 2015 by Frontier Analysis, based out of Ohio, revealed that the artifact was composed of aluminum mixed with silicon and copper. Now, that's
Okay. I know it's hard to hear because I don't know how to record things well, and I don't have a microphone. The microphone up, it disconnects the projector. But I wanted to show that because I wanted you to hear it from the horse's mouth. He's 87 years old. He just reported that last year. And he talked about what he saw as a child, his memories as a child, him and Reme Baca. And we're going to go over that. And the whole thing's available on YouTube. We've probably seen it. But more importantly, there was a little interview in there with Paula Harris, the author. She spoke about Lieutenant Colonel Brophy from Alamogordo. He was flying his plane over the area, viewed 2 little Indian children who were watching the crash site. Now that's crap, because when she wrote the first book, none of that information was in there about Lieutenant Colonel Brophy because nobody knew about it. Lieutenant Colonel Brophy's son read that book and said, oh, hey, got a hold of Paula Harris and said, hey, my father told me all about that. He was the first person on the site. He was there and, blah, 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 blah. But I just wanted to bring it to your attention that is wrong. She talks about being there in 2016. In 2016, she was there at MUFON. She wasn't there with Lieutenant Colonel Brophy's son, and no part of that information was correct or was valid with the first printing of the book. Remember when I was telling you about that hoax shit? Just remember that, people. Okay? Keep that in mind. But you guys, I gotta inspect everything. I gotta.
And heard another boom.
That's what I do. So I loved reading this book, though. It was a great book. And I love thinking about the story because, like I said, we talked about it at Coffee Cups up at Mad Coffee, and we all had an opinion on it. And we discussed the credibility of the two witnesses. And, that first version that came out was very, very different than the second and the third version. And so when I looked at this book, when I read version 2, I looked at it as someone who lives in New Mexico and could identify with where these people were from and what they went through. But I also looked at it as a MUFON investigator. And I had to look at it as evidence, not just a story. But the bottom line is, it's a story. It's a fictional story. Okay. Now, I'm a big Jacques Vallée fan. You guys hear me yapping about him all the time, but not so much Paola Harris. I kept my eyes wide open on this one. So we're going to talk about these two boys, 7 and 9, that lived through two very uncommon childhood events, one right after the other in 1945. So this is my map. Okay. This is a terrain map, so we know what we're looking at. I got a better one coming up after this. Right here is where Padilla family, this is called Walnut Creek. And it's Socorro's up here above. This is Socorro County right there. Over here is Trinity. So that's how close they were to the Trinity site. And of course, Stallion Gate is right there, and everybody knows 380. Now, 380 used to go straight through. And the Padilla Ranch was on BLM land, okay? His father had a ranch on BLM land. And there were a lot of farms in this area. Before the Trinity crash, before the Trinity bomb blast, this was fertile farm ground. There was a lot of mostly Hispanic families that had farms. They had cattle, they had sheep, chickens, they grew crops. They grew enough to live on, they grew enough to sell. That was before the atomic bomb crash. You drive through there now, there's nothing but dust. Nothing but dust in there now. But before that, this was all very fertile ground. Jose's father had a ranch, and he had, I think it was 25 head of cattle on it. It was very important. This is a better map. I tried to... I waited out 25 because 25 wasn't there. 25 goes up to Albuquerque. It wasn't built until 1968. So at the time, just Route 1 was there. And you can see the little owl I put there. That's the owl bar that everybody went to. Oppenheimer went to the owl bar. Everybody goes to the owl bar. Nothing else there. And it sustained it. But right over here, 380 went straight through, and that's where the Padilla Ranch was. So I just wanted you to all have an idea. Again, one went north to Socorro and Albuquerque, and south to Cruces. So that's just to get our bearings where we're talking about. So the story starts around noon on Thursday, August 16th, 1945. The two boys, Jose and Reme, were doing their daily chores. Their chores as little children were to ride their horses along the fence line on that Padilla Ranch, and to check to make sure that the fence line wasn't broken, and to count all those 25 heads of cattle that were his father's cattle. And his father had told him that one of the cows was pregnant. She's going to have a calf. So keep an eye out for her. Make sure she's okay. See if she had her calf. So they dismounted. They were riding the line. Well, they had to dismount because the terrain got too steep, and they were looking for this cow. They couldn't find the cow. So they climbed up on there, and they found the cow, and she had her calf, and they were both good. So they're great. They're both good. So they decided to have a snack. Jose's mom had made him a little lunch. So they sat there for a little while. So this is in the afternoon, and everybody knows in New Mexico, in the afternoon, we get monsoons. We get a monsoon rain shower. So they went underneath a ridge that was there to keep dry while it was raining, and finished up their lunch. And then they decided they were going to go back home. They found the cow, they found the calf, let's go home. But they said that as they were getting ready to leave, they saw a brilliant light and the ground shook, and they heard a terrible noise, a crunching sound, and they thought there had been another bomb drop. Remember, just the month before, it had been Trinity. The bomb had exploded, and they thought it happened again. But as they said, as Jose said, they were more curious than scared, so they followed the smoke. They followed the smoke from that crash. So they followed the smoke up through a canyon, and eventually it led them out over to a big ridge, and they could see a fire of a crash off in the distance. And the smoke was really intense, and it was rolling down the ridge. And so they were walking towards it, and they saw a radio tower, a 50-foot radio tower that was broken. They used to call it the Italian Tower. And they could see it was broken, it was crashed into, and so they both thought, well, there's always planes flying around, maybe a plane flew into it. So they really started going near that crash because they thought that maybe a plane crashed and somebody could be hurt. So they wanted to get near that. So as they got closer to it, they looked out over the ridge and they saw a big gouge. They said it was as wide as a football field, and as far as they could see, a big gouge. And they kept looking at the smoke, and at the bottom, as it cleared, they could see a gray metallic avocado-shaped object with a big hole in the side of it. Big hole in the side of it. They could see a clear dome on the top. And the little boy, Reme, asked Jose, is that a plane that went down? So the boys watched it up there for a while. And as everything started to clear, they saw tinfoil, and they saw strings, and they saw stuff just scattered all over the ground. And the hole in the side of the craft was a square hole. It wasn't a jagged hole like it ran into something. It was a square hole like it was, thank you so much. It was a square hole like the door fell off of something. They said it looked like the door. And they looked in and they said that they could see, my Spanish isn't great. He called them hombrecitos, which is supposed to mean little creatures, little men. They saw them running back and forth, little men inside the craft running back and forth. They saw it through this door opening. And Reme said he could remember that they were crying, and the cry sounded like the cry of a baby bunny, like when you get a baby bunny and it squeals. And he was so upset he started to cry because he thought they were hurt. So, but Jose was like, hey, let's go down there. Let's go in. Let's go see if they need our help. Let's go down. And Reme's like, he was crying. He's like, no, I don't want to go. So it was around sunset. And they'd been there, they left the house at noon. So they watched it for a little while. They watched the little hombrecitos running back and forth, the little hombres. And they decided we're going to go home because our parents are going to be really mad that we're so late. And they're going to be worried about us, but we're going to come back. Jose promised him, we're going to come back. We're going to come back and check on them. We'll come back and check on them after we check in at home. So they left. So when they got home, his father, Jose's father, was Faustino. Faustino was worried. And they told him, oh, don't worry, the cow's fine. She had her calf. She's good. But we saw something else. So they told him the whole story. And he said, it belongs to the army. Leave it alone. And Reme, they put Reme in the pickup truck and they drove Reme home. And on the way over to Reme's house, they said, don't you tell anybody about this. Don't talk to anyone about this until we know exactly what it is. He told them not to go to the crash site the next day Do not go to the crash site. Now, Faustino worked at what's called the Bosque de la Pace, which is also on Route 1. It's a nature preserve. He worked for the state. He was a state employee. And Reme's father worked in Albuquerque at the VA. So he was a federal employee. So Reme's dad would go to Albuquerque and stay there all week and work, and then he would come home. So Faustino kind of looked after Reme and kept, an eye, because they're all families and they're all family farmers all together there. It was a close neighborhood. So the next day, Faustino called his friend, New Mexico State Police Officer Eddie Apodaca. That was on Friday. On Saturday, Officer Apodaca came over to the farm, loaded the boys in the police car, him and Faustino. They drove up to the crash site because he wanted to see what it was. So the boys directed the adults to the crash site. They parked the police car. They climbed up there. But when they got there, the craft was gone. The craft was gone. So the men were making fun of them, saying, yeah, right, there was a crash. Sure, yeah, there was yeah. And the boys were like, yeah, really, there was. So the boys started running down the hill. They ran down the hill to where the crash site was. And, they told the parents, the men, come down. They started pulling. There was tumbleweeds all piled up around the craft. And all this stuff that was on the ground had all been swept to the side. So it was covered up. The boys started pulling the tumbleweeds out. The adults got down there and got serious when they saw the craft, when they got down there, and they were like, there really is something here kind of thing. And they pulled the rest of the tumbleweeds out, and they made the boys get away from it. They told me, you get away from this. And the men walked in. They went inside the craft. The men walked in there. Said they were in there for about 10 minutes, and when they came out, they were like really, really stern and said, come on, we're out of here. And the little boys are saying, but what about the Ambachitos? We got to find them. Where are they? And they're like, get in the car. We're getting out of here. So police officer Apodaca had a talk with the boys in the car on the way back, because they were just excited. We told you that it was there. And he told them, you are under oath to remain silent. If you tell anybody about this, your parents are going to lose their jobs. They work for the state. They're going to lose their jobs. You cannot tell anybody. So the boys were scared. They were really scared to death, and they swore they would keep the oath. And they did. They kept that oath for 50 years. And they only spoke to each other about it when nobody else was around. And they called it their secret truth. So the next morning, Sunday, Staff Sergeant Alvia from the Army went to the Padilla Ranch, knocked on the door, asked Faustino if they could take down the fence and the back gate. I'm not making this up, people. He asked them, can they take down the fence and the back gate so they can get their equipment through to recover a weather balloon? Yes, a weather balloon. The Army installed a road over to the crash site, which is still in use to this day. When MUFON went out there, they drove on that road. That road is still there. So the Army needs equipment. They need a crane, a flatbed truck, a Jeep, a paved road to recover a weather balloon. Okay, now keep in mind, this was 2 years before Roswell. So we had the first weather balloon bullcrap story. So Faustino, though, told the boys, stay away from the crash site. Don't go up there. Leave them alone. It's the Army. It's the Army's business. And, of course, they went up to the site because they're little boys. But they went up with binoculars. They went up binoculars, and they hid up there, and they watched the soldiers. And they watched the soldiers load the craft onto the back of the flatbed, and they had to make a frame because it was so big. It came out on each side of it, and they had to make a metal frame so it wouldn't tilt out. And the Army guys, they started cleaning up all the stuff that was around, because there was little spider webs, they called them. Spider webs were everywhere. So the boys watched the Army soldiers for the rest of the week, and they were pretty young, the Army soldiers were. And actually, after the staff sergeant Avila left, the soldiers just kind of like kicking around, playing music. And instead of picking the stuff up, the boys saw them kick it into that gouge, that big long gouge that was there. The soldiers were kind of kicking the stuff in there instead of picking it up. So, and the boys also said the spider webs blew around and where they were hiding, they could collect some of it up there. And they did. And there was some foil. And Jose said the foil was like the tin foil in his mother's cigarette pack. But when he said he folded it, it unfolded. They heard music playing, and the soldiers would cut out and leave, and they would go over to the owl bar. They would go over to the owl bar, and they knew this because Jose's cousin worked at the owl bar. She was a girl, and they used to flirt with him. So they knew that's where the soldiers were going. But they could tell at the end of the week that the site was pretty much cleaned up, and they're going to be leaving soon. So they said this was their last chance to sneak down there and visit that avocado before it left. So they were going to get a souvenir. Jose talked about that a little bit, grabbing that thing off the wall, putting it in his garage. Well, when he was a little boy, he couldn't get it off the wall. So he went down there and he got a crowbar out of the toolbox on the flatbed truck, and they pried it off the wall. They took the bracket off the wall, and he gave it to Reme, and Reme called it his tesoro, his treasure. So, Reme had his little treasure from it. And they also collected some metal and stuff that was around, and some foil. And Reme said he stuffed all his into a Prince Albert tobacco can. He kept his little souvenirs in there. So the next day, the flatbed trailer left Walnut Creek on Route 1, left San Antonio to an undisclosed location. That was the last time the boys saw the avocado. It was under a tarp, and it went past, they watched it go past the Padilla Ranch back onto Route 1. And Jose and Reme didn't talk to anybody about this because they gave an oath to Officer Baca. So this is where the story ended in the first chapter, the first version of the book. This was the end. This is where it was, and this was all the information we had about this. Like I said, I believe a child when a child tells me something. Very good description. They talked a lot about it. At this point, I'm reading this and I'm with it. I'm with the story. So if this was reported to MUFON by either Reme or Jose, I'd have been amazed at their memories from all these years. But like I said, children are very good witnesses if you get to them before there's other influences. So there's other things that they said that matches with what was going on at that time. After the Trinity crash, people's cattle and animals were dying. They were dying from the fallout from the atomic bomb. Livestock were getting sick. Planes did patrol the area. If you remember in the Holloman incident in 1964, they were still patrolling that area and testing the air. They were doing B-27s, I think, then. The one who saw the object that landed at White Sands was somebody who was patrolling that area, checking the atmosphere still. So they were still doing it in the 60s. So, like I said, it was easy for me to find that the Padillas rented or were granted BLM land. They had a 10-year lease right in that spot where he said it was. Found it online like that. Found a lot of other stuff online, but that was, Jose Padilla had an amazing memory. More than 50 years after this event, his memory of those creatures and that craft really make this story extremely believable. Multiple times through this book, Valet describes Padilla as having a photographic memory. I'm going to quote, "This Jose Padilla is the best witness you could have. He is an excellent observer. Paola Harris said, Jose Padilla is one of the most honest people I have ever met. Reme called him, I am not even going to try to pronounce that Spanish word, but it means praying mantis. Reme thought they looked like praying mantises. Jose thought they looked like fire ants that were standing up and running around. They had good descriptions, very, very descriptive of what those little hombres were that were running around. So when Valet interviewed Jose, he said that he wished they had returned to that site that next day, that Friday, because his father told him not to go and he didn't go. But he thought that if he had went back, maybe the little Humberchitos were there. He said in a quote, Jose was interviewed years later about this, and he said there was no sign of them anywhere when we returned on Saturday with Officer Apodaca. And he felt very guilty that he didn't go back and try and save them. At 9 years old, he felt that. So both Reme and Jose left San Antonio. Reme moved when he was 16 to Washington State. He joined the Marines right out of high school. He did a 6-year enlistment. He returned to Tacoma, Washington, where he spent the rest of his life. He was a master mechanic. He also held several governor-appointed positions in support of Mexican-American community. He was in the community for over 50 years. Reme led a very full life of service to his country and state and his family. He died in 2013. He was 75, and it was midway through this book. So Reme never lived to see the publishing of this book or anything that happened afterward. And also, Reme was never interviewed by Jacques Vallée. Jacques Vallée didn't join this endeavor until 2018. So what happened to Jose? Okay, so Jose left San Antonio. He joined the National Guard when he was 14. He said they were desperate for guardsmen in New Mexico, and his mother signed for him. After his enlistment, he settled in California after the war, becoming a highway patrol state trooper for 32 years. During that time on the highway patrol, he was wounded during a traffic stop. Jose had spoken with Paola Harris on the phone in 2010 when she was at Reme's home in Tacoma, Washington. She had talked to Reme, and Reme told her the whole story. She wanted to verify that this really happened. So she called Jose at home and talked to him. And he acknowledged that story, and Jose verified the facts, but Jose told her he's not interested in anything to do with that book. He wanted nothing to do with the book in 2010. So a little more about Reme. Reme had told his family about the crash, but they just didn't believe him. And he didn't think anybody else would believe him. In 1995, he went to a MUFON convention. He met author Don Schmitt there, and he told Don Schmitt he witnessed a crash on the plains of St. Augustine in 1947, not 1945. After a brief interview, Don Schmitt said he was not interested in researching the event, but he kept all his notes from that interview, and he kept his notes, and they were verified later. In 2003, Reme contacted author Tom Carey, who did a 30-minute interview on the phone, and Tom recorded the phone on a tape deck. In that interview, Reme said the event happened in 1946. So he broke the oath made to Officer Apodaca. Reme had become a driving force with trying to get this story heard. He discussed it with anybody who would listen to him about it. So the one thing, though, is the date and the location was like a moving target. Depending on who he talked to, he told them different times and different locations. In 2002, Jose's son, Sammy Padilla, did a genealogy search, and Reme's name came up as someone of interest in San Antonio. Jose recognized him. He said, "That's my good buddy Reme." Looked Reme up in 2002, and those two old friends reconnected in 2002. Jose was in California, Reme was in Washington State. And they got to talking, about things growing up. And Reme was really trying to convince him into talking about this story. And we got to write a book, and we got to do an interview. We got to do all this. Jose really didn't want much to do with it. But all the other witnesses to the event were dead. Those were the only two left to talk about the story. So they decided, Reme was able to convince an old school chum to do an interview in 2003. Moffett, his name was Ben Moffett. He worked for the Socorro Mountain Mail. So that was the first interview they did about it, the first story that was written about it. And he said that Moffett said he's not into UFOs, but he changed his mind after speaking to Reme and Jose. And he did an excellent two-part article for the Socorro Mountain Mail about that 1945 event. It was the first known printing of the complete story, and it was published in November 2nd of 2003. Excerpts of that article were published in a book called Magic Eyes Only by Ryan Wood in November of 2005. I read the Socorro Mountain Mail article, and it ended pretty much where the story did that I just told you guys, of the kids and the craft driving off Route 1 and just going down the road. That's kind of where it ended. But after reading, someone read Moffat's story in 2005. Researcher Stanton Friedman read it, and he contacted Reme Baca, and he did an interview with him for 10 minutes on the telephone. Reme said that Stan Friedman told him on that call that when Stan Friedman was investigating Roswell, he had gotten a phone call that someone was telling him there had been a big crash in San Antonio. But Stan Friedman said it wasn't important, and he didn't follow up on it. Now, Stan Friedman's original Roswell investigation was in 1978, but there's no way to confirm that Stan Friedman and Reme Baca ever spoke, because Stan Friedman died in 2019. But I do question that, because Stan Friedman, he didn't let nothing go. He chased it down to the ground. If he had a lead, he was on it. I can't believe he would have walked away from that case. But according to Reme, he did. So there was multiple publications, I listed them, that talked about this crash. This is all before this book was ever published. Multiple publishers have talked about this crash. Reme himself wrote a book in 2011, Born on the Edge of Ground Zero, Living in the Shadow of Area 51. The book was co-authored by Jose Padilla. It was mostly, though, it was about the bomb detonation and what had happened to their families and what had happened to their community. It only had very little mention of a saucer crash. So he wrote a book about the atomic bomb blast, not about this crash, when he had a chance to write it himself. But in 2010, Reme started meeting with Paula Harris at his home in Washington State. Again, Jose confirmed the story on the telephone, but he wasn't interested in it. Also, MUFON, I have that there, but even MUFON had it in this is dated June 2016, and they visited the crash site with all these people from MUFON. Reme was trying to get MUFON to pay for excavation because they wanted to find the stuff that the soldiers had kicked into the ground, so they were trying to get MUFON to pay for that. But again, this was all prior to Jacques Vallée joining onto the crowd. So, and also Jose Padilla had done a coast-to-coast interview with George Norrie. Again, that was also prior. So Jose was getting a little more involved with it. So, like I said, Jacques Vallée is very familiar with New Mexico. He traveled here extensively with J. Allen Hynek in the 70s. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the movie, is about the Holloman Landing. It is about the Holloman Landing of 1964. And parts of it is, but it's based on Vallée and Hynek's investigation of this area. He became interested in the San Antonio event in October of 2017. He was on a dig site in the plains of St. Augustine with a friend, and they went to the Owl Bar for lunch. And there's all these pictures on the wall. There's pictures of Robert Oppenheimer. There's all kind of stuff going on. And his buddy's name was Brinkley. Brinkley told Vallée that there was a UFO crash just miles from this location, and forget about everything you heard about Roswell. Nobody investigated this significant case. So Vallée got a little interested in it. He found out through the grapevine that Paola Harris was writing a book about it. He looked her up and he joined the project. So Vallée didn't meet Harris and he didn't meet Jose Padilla until 2018. So Vallée and Padilla spoke multiple times, and Vallée held him in very high regard. In 2020, Jose was 84. He went to the crash site one last time with Jacques Vallée. Vallée said his calm and patient attitude showed strength and courage only an experienced police officer can acquire. In the first and second editions of that book, Jose is referred to as Officer Padilla. Many passages. He spoke about the surgery of the bullet that was removed from his abdomen, that bullet that he took when he was working as a police officer in California. Vallée devoted a great deal of time in this book, though, about the Trinity bomb detonation, not so much about the crash. He talked a lot about, the Manhattan Project and what it did to the area and the historical significance of that. He also spoke about the Socorro investigation with Dr. Hynek, and Vallée's attention to detail are instrumental in the believability of this event. And in his conclusion, he did an excellent conclusion, epilogue, notes and references, fantastic. But what about the investigation part of this? There's not a lot of investigation. I don't understand why he didn't look into the investigating that Harris did prior a little closer. And at that time, I had to take off my Jacques Vallée fan hat and I had to put back on my MUFON investigator hat, and I got a different perspective. The second edition of the book from 2022 talks about information and evidence that was found and who else knew about the crash site. In that first book, nobody else knew about it, just Faustino and his mom, and, his grandmom and the two boys and Officer Apodaca. But all these other people know about it. So there's a little side stories that I'm not even going to go into. But the two I am going to talk about is the name of the B-25 pilot from Alamogordo Gunnery Range, who is said to have investigated the smoke around a communication tower, Lieutenant Colonel Brophy. And there's also a niece, Sabrina Padilla, who had the most to say about the evidence, the metal, the foil, the angel hair. She had a whole lot to say about it, but she wasn't even born yet. She grew up on the Padilla Ranch in the 50s and 60s with her cousin, Faustino Myers. So why is Sabrina so important to the case? Because it's her interaction with the evidence, the physical evidence, that made her a major contributor to the second edition. Brophy's son called Harris after reading the first edition of the book, and he said, "Hey, my father was there. And my father told me all about the smoke, the broken tower in 1978. He said he had flown over the site and saw two little Indian boys on horses watching the crash site. He was added to the passage when I was talking about Jose and Reme climbing out over the ridge. In volume 2, they tucked this airplane, this B-25 going over at that time. The B-25 was sent out on a training mission over Walnut Creek. And because in Alamogordo, they said that there was a communication tower that stopped transmitting. The crew reported back heavy smoke in the canyons, but most likely it was from the recent rainstorm. Billy Brophy was Lieutenant Colonel Brophy's son. He said that his father was on that site Friday. You know, that Friday when the boys weren't there? Yeah. He said his father was there on that Friday and he was in charge of the crash. So that he was responsible for the crash and all that. So it is true that Trinity Army Air Control sent out B-25s to patrol that area. That is true. They were monitoring security and radioactive fallout. But that wasn't hard for me to confirm. That was pretty easy for me to confirm. I really wish Jacques Vallée had done a Google search on that one. So in the first edition of the book, Vallée and Baca and Padilla did not mention seeing any airplanes circling overhead. As a matter of fact, that George Norrie interview, Jose Padilla said there was nobody there. He said it emphatically on air. In 2011, there's a quote from Reme Baca in his own book that said everything appeared still on page 39. In 2021, investigator Kevin Rendell asked Vallée, so where's the military report? Where's the military report? There was a flight over from Alamogordo, Gunnery Range. Where's the report? Vallée told him those records we are still researching. So Brophy's other son, Sean, was questioned about his father's part in this event. And he said he had no recollection of his father ever discussing this event. He also said that his brother Billy was a bit eccentric. In the third edition of the book, on page 33, Jacques Vallée completely walks back any of the Brophy involvement or that he was ever there. So in the third edition, they said, Vallée says, well, that didn't happen. That we're wrong. That didn't happen. So in the early 60s, Sabrina, she lived with her grandparents on the ranch. She recalls the military visiting. They wanted to remove a broken tower through the Padilla ranch. She said she saw them, that road we keep talking about, she saw them take the broken tower out. That's why the tower's not there anymore. She saw it leave the ranch. So she also said she played with the metal as a child. She described the foil and the angel hair. She said that the angel hair used to glow. It glowed at night. And that her grandmother braided it into her hair when she was a little girl. And they put it on Christmas trees as tinsel because it glowed. And her cousin Faustino Myers remembers that angel hair. And he said if you touched it, it stung you like a bee. It stung you like a bee. So, like I said, childhood memories are good and believable. And but I was kind of like, Harris investigated this crash 11 years prior. Why didn't she ever turn up anything about Cousin Sabrina or Cousin Sabrina's stuff? That didn't come out until 2. She had nothing on her until version 2 of the book. So Sammy Padilla, we talked about, he was the guy who did the genealogy search for his and found Reme and reunited Jose and Reme. And on July 23rd of 2022, he called New Mexico State Police because he felt his father was being manipulated. And he said to the police that his father had dementia. Sammy says in a 20-minute recorded interview that you can Google search, my father is a liar, and he's been coached with a promise of a movie made about him by Disney. A lot of people knew what he was saying was bullshit. Sammy had a power of attorney to take care of his father, but his cousin Sabrina had it revoked. He told the police, she's the one who I believe revoked my power of attorney, my cousin Sabrina. She's an instigator. And she started supporting him and pushing him on this movie. My father has also been telling people he was a police officer in California. He never was. He's been telling people he was a war veteran. He never was. He said, my father is a pathological liar and is always the victim. These are the sons from the words of the son. They were recorded because the police officer had a little camera on and recorded the whole thing. So at that time, Jose Padilla was living with his son in Socorro. But after he called the state police, Jose went to live with Sabrina in California. That movie clip you saw there, he was living with Sabrina in California. So was Jose a 14-year-old National Guardsman? His son said he was deaf in one ear. There was no way he could have passed the physical. I could not find any record of Jose being in the Guard. He said he was shot in the Korean War. The Korean War ended in July of 1952. Jose would have been 16. If he would have been shot in the Korean War, he would have been getting a check. You get shot in the war, you're going to get a check for that. There's no check for Jose. So in the third edition of the book, Valet says he misunderstood Jose when he talked about working for the California Highway Patrol. Jose actually worked as a truck inspector for the maintenance department. He wasn't an officer, and the references to Officer Padilla were removed from the third edition. But what about all the quotes from Jose Padilla himself? Talking about being a police officer. He discusses, Jose Padilla talks about being a police officer and being shot as a police officer. Well, he had a bullet that he was in the hospital. He had a bullet in his chest and all this other was going on. You know, that came from the horse's mouth, that he was a wounded police officer. So all three editions of this book talks about Officer Apodaca. Even the Socorro Mountain Mail article from 2003 talks about Officer Apodaca. He was taken to the crash site. He was a friend of the Padilla family. Apodaca was the one who called the army and told the army, hey, there's a crash site. He swore the two little boys to the oath of silence. A simple Google search will reveal that Eddie Apodaca was in Europe in World War II in 1945 at the time of the crash. He had not even become a police officer yet. He didn't graduate from the State Police Academy until 1951. On the third edition of that book, on page 27, there's a footnote saying that Mr. Baca is in error about the name of the policeman. But again, it doesn't reference to all the times that Jose Padilla talked about Officer Apodaca. It doesn't reference that at all. So I read, like I said, I read the edition of the Socorro Mountain Mail from their friend Ben Moffitt, and he identified, both Baca and Padilla identified Officer Apodaca as being there. This is why any reference to Eddie Apodaca and Officer Apodaca being there, I will have to take all that evidence and just throw it out because it's all crap. He was not there. So that means the visit to the little Cheetos that were missing, that didn't happen because there was no Officer Apodaca. The oath of silence, that didn't happen. That was all crap. So the remaining evidence is that piece of metal, you know, Reme's foil, the stuff in the Prince Albert can. But when asked to produce that stuff, Reme couldn't find it and use it to repair something. It's gone. The piece of metal I-beam that Jose found, they wanted to to look at that closely. And in 2007, Officer Timothy Good did. He got a piece of that metal. They produced that metal for him. They did acid tests, and it was 2000 common 2000 series aluminum. The authors wanted to run more tests on it, but Jose said, "Oh, my nephew put it in a scrap pile. We don't have it anymore. It's gone." The Tesoro, the piece of that, that he took off the wall. Reme had it. Reme had that tested. He had it tested in 2002, and it was identified as a windmill tailbone casting, a bracket-like device, part number A585, available on www.aeromotor.com. The Tesoro is, everybody has something to say. It was a lot of controversy on that thing. I really think it was just a souvenir they picked up that day. Maybe when the radio tower got damaged, the windmill on it was broken. If that really is a true story, that's how you got the bracket is still out there. Jacques Vallée has it. So, and the authors disagree. Jacques Vallée says it's a piece of a windmill. It's not anything from inside of a flying saucer, but Harris says that it is. So the two authors are even in disagreement over that. So there was, in the appendix, there's critical analysis written by Jacques Vallée regarding the disagreements regarding his book and the questioning of the testimony and the evidence. There's a blogger out there, Douglas Dean Johnson. He's called the Marador. He called bullshit on this story early. And he said, Vallée says he does admit the evidence showed Baca only ever worked as a truck inspector for the state police. He tried to walk back the statements about the Korean War. He tried to clean up the National Guard stuff, but I looked on the muster rolls, which are online. You can look at muster rolls. That's how I found Eddie Apodaca's stuff, that he was in England during World War II. I couldn't find anything on Jose Padilla. It was pretty easy to find. So also if Jose Padilla had worked for the state of California for 32 years, he would have been drawing a pension. Okay, all California state employees, their pensions are public record. I was unable to find him listed as receiving any pension from the state of California. And the Marador couldn't either. I kind of followed his stuff. He couldn't find anything. So both of these authors agree that Jose is in the highest regard, and they appreciated his interactions at the crash site and his details. Vallée never spoke to Reme Baca. Reme had joined it after Vallée had joined it after Remy's death, and multiple times, Jose Padilla was found to be believable and remarkable. But Vallée, like I said, disagrees with Harris. So the quote that is up here says, the quote above is part of Vallée's response to the Marador blog regarding the inaccuracies of the book. Vallée now refers to them as being repurposed facts. He says he will fix them later, and he did. He fixed a lot of them in 3. So look, these quotes are just some other stuff about this event. This is, at first I really loved this book. I did. I loved it. I wanted it to be true. But after checking the facts myself, and they were really easy to verify, I can't believe I believe any of it now. Maybe if they had stopped after version 1 with the kids, I would have, it's very sloppy. Nothing was fact checked, especially the stuff about Officer Apodaca. I mean, it was so easy to find that and call crap on that one. So one thing I want to do is that this book was published 3 times. A lot of copies of this book were printed at $24.99 each. Paola Harris owns the publishing company that published all these books. So she's getting a big chunk of that. And if Disney were really going to make a movie about it, there'd be even more money. out there about these two little boys from New Mexico, and that could explain why on YouTube right now you can find a lot of stuff about they're really playing this story up as if it's something that's coming down the line. But in the end, that's my end story. I call this a hoax. I call this a hoax. It's just a fictional story about what could have happened, maybe happened, didn't happen in San Antonio, New Mexico. But it was very well written, especially that first edition was extremely well written. I enjoyed that book. I enjoyed reading it. Disappointed in the end. I'm really disappointed with Jacques Vallée right now, but he's getting old, so I'm going to chalk it up to that. Look, I know I ran long and it's hot here, but I wanted to bring to everyone's attention, I didn't do a lot of little stuff at the end. The Big Bang Expo is going to be up at the Taze Center on June 28th. It's freebie. If it's free, it's me, It's a free one. STEM demonstrations, rocket building. Roswell is on the 4th, 5th, and 6th on Main Street, Roswell. I had some flyers I printed out. They were on the table there of the events that day. I'm going to be going up on Saturday myself just to hear the lectures. There's blocks and blocks and blocks. You can walk and see all kind of good stuff and all kind of cool shit. And they have bands this year. It's supposed to be really interesting. If anyone is going that way. Also, a reminder, the Horonata Research Institute on July 7th, 8th, and 9th, Understanding Ancient Astronomies. It's going to be up at the Ruidoso Convention Center. But on July 10th, free, open to the public, they're going to be up at the Space Museum. And there's going to be three speakers, excellent speakers, talking about Three Rivers, Chaco Canyon, and then of course Mr. Greenwald's going to talk to us about Creekside Village. That's going to be really great. If you have a chance to do that on Thursday the 10th I think it's from 10 till 5. I'm not going to miss it. I took leave. Don't tell my flight. But I took leave. I'm going to go see that. So next month's meeting, we're really, really excited about this. We got a live one, guys. We absolutely got a live one. He's going to talk to us about his book, Counterintelligence, Protecting Us from the Realities of Roswell. It's a book about extraterrestrial life, not aliens. It's about unexplained aerial phenomenon, not UFOs, and counterintelligence, not cover-up. It's driven by curiosity and it's backed by years of in-depth research by the author Richard Pestner. He brings a fresh new look, solid reasoning, and compelling facts to this investigation, and maybe it'll shed some light on it. I know every year, guys, I try to bring you something new about Roswell. It gets tougher and tougher every year because we talk to death about Roswell. So anytime they have something new, it's fantastic. And this is a fresh new set of eyes on it that I'm sure some of us, so I'm really looking forward to it. I hope everybody can make it here next month because it's going to be a great one. And if you can't, you can get on Zoom with these poor Zoomers. I'm sorry, guys, but I want to thank everybody for your generosity and for your interest in the topic and coming here today in this horrendous heat. I really, really appreciate it. It's a little better in here today than it was last month. They have it a lot cooler. We don't have to pick the chairs